Hello. Mm. Oh, how is everyone? Well, nobody's viewing yet, but or at least so says the viewer indicator, but occasionally is wrong. Who knows? Um, bleh. Yeah. Close this. I've previously looking at that. Hello. Yes. Happy Monday. Ah, Streamcat has popped in. No swishy. No, just coming through. Okay. Oops, bugger. Just dropping all my shit. Um, yeah. I'll wait, Cole. Someone is watching, but, um, yeah, basically, I thought that today I might talk a little bit about, not got a huge amount, like, prepared, but, about areas of agreement with opposing political philosophies. It's something I've been thinking about a little bit lately, partly inspired by the debate last week, the Hippy Dippy recruitment podcast debate panel show thing, where a couple of people who I disagreed with made good points, and also just generally in the context of, not that people I disagree with never make good points, but you know it was nice to engage with them for a while, which I haven't done a lot lately. And like more generally, um, oh hey, how's it going? Nice to see you. Um, but yeah, more generally, uh, I figure we are in a time of quite vociferous political disagreement, um, at least in the West. In the US, there's obviously the ongoing uh, debate between, you know, should we expand Medicare a bit, or expand access to medicine, and allow some access to immigrants, and have a functioning society, or just burn everything down. Um, so that's an interesting ongoing discussion, uh, and it it worries me sometimes that, because I think that strenuous and passionate political debate is important, is lifeblood of a functional democratic society. But we get into problems when political violence starts popping up, and when we're unable to see our opponents as fellow human beings who want the best for the society, even if we disagree with them. Um, and it can be hard to maintain that perspective when one's opponents include, you know, actual Nazis and tankies and terrible, terrible viewpoints that would lead to mass slaughter. Um, and I think it's entirely appropriate that when it comes to ideologies like that, we just say, no, fuck off. Um, it doesn't matter if the Nazis made their trains run on time. They didn't. That's not true. But even if they had, it wouldn't matter because the ideology is so repugnant that we should reject it outright, even if it does have some silver linings. And pointing to those silver linings isn't a reasonable excuse, isn't something that we should do with ideology that is that poisonous. But lest we forget, not all of our political opponents are Nazis, are tankies. Um, it's the night in the USA. No, here it's I'm in the UK, and it's what time is it here? 10:10, 10 past 10. Uh, Yeah, well, actually, are we in the EU anymore? I'm in Britain, so I'm honestly not sure. I don't think we're um, technically part of the EU anymore. Um, but anyway, I digress. Uh, so yeah, it's important. Have you voted to leave the EU? No, I didn't vote to leave the EU. I voted to stay. Um, uh, there's no reason to hear out an authoritarian. They're necessarily going to do what they do, regardless of people's perspectives, opinions, desires. Yeah, I'd broadly agree with that. At least when it comes to the kind of extreme authoritarian ideologies. Um, But nevertheless, there are people who are, say, a little bit more authoritarian than us who would like, say, slightly tighter immigration controls, who would like to see the police a bit more prominent in society, these kind of beliefs that nonetheless don't make them politically irredeemable. Um, and so I figured I'd chat a little bit today about areas of ideology that I don't hold, that are within the bounds of, I think, acceptable discourse, even if I disagree with them strongly in general. Areas of those ideologies that I do agree with, and that I think, or at least I think, have like some reason for us to pay attention to them and take them seriously, even if overall they're they're not a good idea. In France, we have a globalist president. Have you seen what he said about that? I haven't seen what Macron said about Brexit. I like Macron seems all right as far as these things go. I can't say I follow French politics that closely, but he seems like the better alternative. Um, anyway, yeah. So I definitely agree there. Sort of support the extreme violent ideologies are the problem, but the less violent ones, because of course all ideology involves imposition of violence to some degree. As a liberal, I argue that it's appropriate for the state to use violence to do things like stop murder, to do things like ensure private property rights uh, within a reasonable degree. So, I do support political violence in some to some degree. The problem is, of course, there are some ideologies that support it as a kind of core part of their function and support its use in ways that don't have any meaningful controls. Um, but yeah, so uh, I will say for the purposes of this discussion that I'm a liberal. I'm still not like 100% certain what kind of liberal I am, or even whether it's particularly useful to make the distinction. Um, I I'm probably a social liberal, though uh, I don't want to be like we shouldn't use labels. I'm past labels because labels are useful. Labels are the means by which we compress very complex ideas into easily manageable chunks so that we can handle them in a day-to-day manner. If we were talking about political ideology, and every time you asked someone where do you stand politically, they said, "Well, I'm kind of have some liberal leanings, but I'm also proto-neo-fascist on these specific issues. However, I'm a like social conservative on these issues." It's just going to be difficult. You don't want people listing every single specific policy they hold every time you ask them a simple question. Um, but for the purpose of this discussion, we'll just say I'm liberal, because my views generally tend to align uh, with like mainstream Democrats in the US. Um, oh shit, what's this? Uh, Try not to get too distracted here, but yeah, I have seen a. Uh, oh wait, this is something different. No, I thought this was. I assume Eastern Mediterranean think refugee crisis, but no. Well, I have no background knowledge on the state of oil and gas exploration between Turkey and Greece. I'm sorry, I can't really. comment sensibly. Um, like I know that Turkey is engaging in some pretty reprehensible shit in uh, dealing with the Kurds right now, but uh, well, that's some border gore right there. Anyway, as I was saying, yeah. So I would say I'm liberal, but I think there are some sections of opposing political ideologies, or if not opposing, then uh, political ideologies that I broadly disagree with, um, that have some good points. So first off, um, I'm going to talk just a bit about socialism, conservatism, anarchism, and libertarianism, all of which I think are uh, broadly within the window of things that it's acceptable um, to seriously advocate for. I think that it's not unreasonable to call for tearing down the state, even though I definitely um, uh, would not do so. Okay, I'll check this one last thing. Um, what's this? Okay, yeah, I will, because Brexit is somewhat relevant to this. Um, what's Macron
Exactement,
going
on
to
voit
say?
les choses. Première option, ils vont vers le no deal. Donc ils disent il n'y a pas d'accord. Ça fait peur à tout le monde. Les premiers perdants de ça, ce sont les Britanniques.
True.
Donc dans ce contexte-là, ils vont devoir, sans qu'il y ait de période de transition, de toute façon renégocier une relation future. Je peux vous dire là très solennellement, parce que je l'ai toujours fait, que dans le cadre de cette relation future, les intérêts de la pêche seront défendus. Et il faudra de toute façon qu'on négocie avec eux une période transitoire,
Everyone
parce que
gets
les
very
Britanniques
interested
ne
about
peuvent pas se
fishing. I
permettre de
don't
plus
know
avoir
why
un avion qui
fishing is
décolle ou
such a
qui
big
atterrit chez eux.
deal,
Et leur supermarché, à 70%, ils
but
sont approvisionnés par ce qui vient
yeah.
de l'Europe continentale. Deuxième option, ils nous disent on va essayer, à mon avis c'est ce qu'ils vont faire, je les connais un peu, on va essayer d'améliorer ce qu'on peut obtenir des Européens et on va revenir faire le vote. Là on regardera, peut-être qu'on peut améliorer un ou deux points, je crois pas
Yeah, it's not
tellement,
been going
parce
so
qu'on a été au
well.
bout de ce qu'on pouvait faire dans l'accord. Et on ne va pas, pour essayer de régler un problème de politique intérieure britannique, ne pas défendre les intérêts des Européens. Puis il y a une troisième option qui est de nous
Mm.
dire, et à mon avis ils vont commencer par la deuxième puis ça finira à la troisième, on prend les paris, je prends mes risques, c'est qu'ils vont dire au fond on va prendre plus de temps. Et donc ils vont demander d'avoir un plus grand délai pour renégocier quelque chose. Et donc ils vont prendre plus de temps, peut-être qu'ils vont enjamber les élections européennes pour essayer de trouver quelque chose d'autre. Mais ça nous dit aussi beaucoup dans la période que nous vivons de ce que des référendums qui paraissent sympathiques peuvent créer. C'est que c'est un référendum qui a été manipulé de
True,
l'extérieur par
true.
beaucoup de ce qu'on appelle les infox aujourd'hui, où on a dit tout et n'importe quoi, puis après on a dit maintenant débrouillez-vous. Et bilan des courses, c'est pas vrai. On a menti aux gens, et ce qu'ils ont
I mean,
choisi,
he's
c'est pas
talking sense
possible.
to me. Yeah.
Bah après, bon courage pour les représentants de la nation qui doivent mettre en œuvre un truc qui n'existe pas et l'expliquer aux gens, vous avez voté sur un truc, on vous avait menti. C'est ça ce qu'ils ont à faire.
I mean, yeah, spot on. Um, it's a absolutely shit show of a situation. I can't say I've been following as closely as I should. I follow US politics a bit more closely, but yeah, it looks like they've been struggling to actually implement anything. The negotiations haven't gone super well for Britain, and shockingly, we're going to leave without, or we are leaving, have left without any like adequate deal, and now it's just a nightmare figuring out uh, uh, joint standards and regulations so that we can continue functionally trading. And of course, it hasn't put us in the uh, best position for dealing with, a global pandemic. Who would have thought that maybe international trade and like close cooperation with one's closest strategic partners might be useful for dealing with a major global crisis? Um, yeah, no. I did. Speaking of things that we kind of disagree with, but there are some decent points. I I used to be more of a libertarian, and one of my concerns about the EU, and one of the reasons I did give some serious consideration to either abstaining or potentially voting for Brexit was that the European Union is engaged in quite a lot of protectionist trade behaviour. So particularly, I have lots of points of contention with the common agricultural policy and the way that it essentially disadvantages producers of agricultural products, particularly finished agricultural products, so like roasted coffee as opposed to just coffee beans, which have much higher markups. It inhibits the ability for producers in the developing world to sell that to European markets and generally reduces their income. Uh, Turns out the EU has a system called, I think, Anything But Arms, which massively reduces or removes tariffs to the poorest countries, including for finished agricultural products, which addresses this specific issue. But when I didn't know about Anything But Arms, it was a big concern for me. And there are some other issues of kind of protectionism like that I disagree with and that I think the EU shouldn't implement. Of course, turns out when I spoke with a friend of mine who studies or just generally knows a lot more about kind of international relations than me, he points out that first of all there are methods for reducing tariffs to the poorest countries, which are the ones that I'm most interested in helping out. And second, the EU as it exists or as it existed um, was dominated by free traders like the UK and the Netherlands, more protectionist countries like Italy and France, and then somewhat neutral countries, or not necessarily neutral, but more ambivalent countries like Germany. And if the UK exits the EU, obviously it's going to slide in a more protectionist direction. Indeed, if the UK had been involved in the formation of the precursor to the EEC just after World War II, the European Council, I think, Britain had a opportunity to get involved in that from the ground floor and to help write all of the standards, including pressing for greater free trade, that led to the formation of the EU. But Britain didn't, and thus had less impact on the development of the European community, the European Economic Community, and later on the EU. And we're just going through that again. The part of the reason why the UK didn't get involved with that in the first place was the fact that the UK's kind of always had these weird pretensions to sort of being globally above it all, being above the fray of normal alliances. We're the empire that rules the waves. We the sun never sets. All of that kind of stuff, and yet at the same time a kind of parochialism that prevents that encourages a lot of British people to want to distance themselves from their continental mainland neighbours, which has led us, as Macron was just saying, has led us to take a referendum that seems like a easy choice. We can take back sovereignty and move the power back to the UK, keep it away from the faceless bureaucrats, and instead give it to different faceless bureaucrats who have to renegotiate all of the trade deals. Um, so yeah, that's not gone great. Um, and like I say, for a while I did give serious consideration to voting for leaving the EU because I think that it's an institution or a set of institutions that has plenty of problems, and it would be naive to. Oh, thank you, Corpus Coliseum. Oh, cool name. Love it. Um, yeah, as a neuroscientist, I very much appreciate the name. Um, uh, but yeah, it's not great, and it brings me back to the whole original point of being worried about the rise of authoritarianism and the rise of kind of isolationism, nationalism that it's very much bound up in. Um, uh, by the way, I know it sounds dumb, but does the UK's royal family have political power? Not really. They've got quite a lot of soft power, um, and so their power kind of lies at two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, officially, it's the Queen who's got to open Parliament, and the monarch could prevent the government from opening and could just not call a prime minister, and then there would be no government. But in practice, it's a ceremonial role that just happens. And I'm sure if a monarch actually refused to do it, there would be a little constitutional crisis. There would be a lot of arguing for a few months, and then they would just get written out of the constitution or spoken out of the constitution because we don't really have a written constitution as such. Um, but on the other end of the scale, they're quite prominent figures, and a decent chunk of the country really loves them. A overwhelming majority of the country likes them, and a decent chunk of the country gets very excited by the prospect of things like getting an OBE or a knighthood or whatever. Oh, sorry, Corporate Clopin subscribed. Coliseum subscribed. I thought that was just a follow, but oh, extra thank you. That's lovely. Anyway, yeah. So they have quite a lot of um, sort of implicit power with being able to, not that they have full control over the honours list, but having a royal family member turn up to your function or give you a phone call or speak to a business person, whatever, that impresses people, and so they can get their way quite effectively. And they're also obviously very wealthy, in large part to the crown holdings, like the crown estate, which is the ownership of that is complex and um, weird. So basically, they don't have, they can't write legislation, and they can't do much official stuff politically. Uh, but they they do, yeah, they get written they the Queen writes you a letter when you get to 100, I think, or get a long wedding anniversary, things like this. Um, yeah, if you're French, your last royal family didn't end up well at all. Um, nice houses though. The Sun King was very had some style. Uh, are there instances politically that you think the Queen could step in? I'm a Republican, really, at least at heart. Um, I'm not gonna. It's not a hill I'll die on because I don't think the royal family is particularly politically damaging, and they don't they don't cost that much money. But I think they should just stay out of politics entirely. I'm fine if they want to just fuck off to their castles, open parliament once a year, and just don't do anything. But I don't like Prince Charles. He does quite a lot of this kind of soft meddling in politics. KJ, uh, yeah, listen, they're kind of a iconic ceremonial role mostly. KJ, what's the title supposed to refer to? It refers to the thing I was talking about before I got distracted, and I am not I'm not a Trump supporter. No, the thing I was talking about before I got distracted was areas of political philosophies that I broadly disagree with, that nonetheless I think have some good ideas. Um, so, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a liberal, but I think it's worth paying attention to people of different political stripes, uh, excluding Nazis and tankies, because they often have some good ideas, and there's people generally don't believe in things that are completely batshit, that have no compelling basis for believing them. They do believe in some weird things often, but the majority of people have to have some compelling hook, some plausible reason to believe in a political position. So we can expect that any given political position will probably have one or two ideas in it that are worth taking seriously, at least. Um, and yeah, that's an accurate description. Corpus Coliseum. We just love it when the royals like turn up at a flower show or a like dog show thing or horse races. They love horse racing. Um, so, uh, no, KJ, sorry. I'm saying political philosophies that aren't Nazis and tankies have some good ideas. Um, political philosophies, all political philosophy, no, not all, a lot of political philosophies, most like vaguely mainstream political philosophies, have one or two good points about them, which is what I'm about to discuss. Nazis and tankies, I'm very explicitly excluding from this. Um, and I think that even if one could point towards a few areas of their philosophy that might have some good consequences, the overall effect of them is so utterly terrible. Some people say that uh, women's equality was better in the Soviet Union, which, there is some truth to that. There was certain areas of Soviet society that were less sexist than equivalent areas of Western society. But that doesn't for a second mean we should consider implementing any of the Soviet ideas. And there are many better reasons and many better ways to go about bringing about equality between the sexes. Um, uh, no, I'm saying, sorry, I'm saying, KJ, that there is nothing good about the ideology of Nazism and Marxism-Leninism, and that even if you can point to areas of those that seem to be good, we should still reject the ideology out of hand because their consequences are so awful. But there are areas of socialism, conservatism, anarchism, libertarianism that, though I disagree with their overall thrust, um, I think are worth seriously considering. So this is very much, just to be clear, this is very much about ideologies that I disagree with, but that I think are in a position to have reasonable disagreement with. I don't think there's any grounds for reasonable disagreement between Nazis and tankies and other people, because Nazis and tankies are both peddling ideologies that lead pretty much inevitably to massive, awful human rights abuses, and also um, because they pretty much never argue in good faith. They're always engaging in deceptive behavior, in just outright lies, in misinformation in order to make their point. So Nazis and tankies can fuck off. But though I disagree with, say, socialists and conservatives, um, nevertheless, I think it's worth talking to them. Anyway, um, are you part of the British population going to flower and horse shows? I have never been to a flower or a horse show. Um, I don't really like big events in public, so probably wouldn't really go to either. Uh, but yeah, lots of silly hats and stuff as well. I don't go in for silly hats. Um, anyway, yeah. So socialism. Um, I think something that's worth considering is this whole. Oh yeah, I did see the Queen at Buckingham Palace once. This is true. um, you studying the same subject as Sam Harris did? Kind of. Sam Harris's area of neuroscience is quite distinct from mine, but yeah, broadly neuroscience. Yeah, um, I'm not actually very familiar with his neuroscience work, so I can't comment as to whether it's any good. Um, but yeah, so socialism, or generally like lefty progressivism, um, I think it's there's the old saying, first they laugh at you, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Um, and that's often used to justify uh, stupid ideas that people are ignoring, laughing, or fighting. because the implication is any idea that is ignored, laughed at, or fought must be good, which obviously isn't necessarily true. But the the progressive left tends to generate the I think it's fair to say overwhelming majority of novel ideas that end up getting ignored, laughed, and fought. And though many of them end up being crap, some of them end up being very useful indeed. And it's broadly politically uh, I shall clarify as well. When I say socialism here, I'm using it in quite broad terms and using it in the context of the progressive left in the West who advocate for increased governmental control over the means of production, increased regulation of the means of production, but who aren't advocating for full-on Marxism-Leninism. Um, so I'd include with this probably people who are sort of moderate, like communists, but because I know some people who advocate for some form of communism, although the term communism is, as with socialism, encompasses, depending on who you talk to, encompasses a very wide variety of topics. I'm generally using these terms quite broadly here, um, just as I'm using the term liberal to describe myself quite broadly. But broadly speaking, the left, in particular the labour movement, um, this is something that I previously disagreed with more, being a libertarian. I was much more of a kind of, oh, unions aren't they harm consumers and they end up as kind of criminal cartels, which there is some truth to that in some industries, but broadly speaking, having protections for workers and implementing things like the 40-hour work week, things like socialized medicine in the UK and throughout most of Europe, these are policies that were undeniably historically driven by the left, and indeed some people who are way too far left for my taste overall. Um, but nonetheless, I think it's difficult to argue that the effect, at least on workers, has been very, very positive. I certainly would much rather live in a world where we have government mandated restriction on working hours and mandated overtime and so forth, even if those rules aren't perfectly followed and if some employers do break them, they at least provide a barrier to the most egregious abuses. We don't anymore have people, children working down mines for 16 hours a day. That's just not something that happens in the West, at least not without it being, a terrifying scandal that rocks the papers for weeks on end. And the problem I find is that it's so hard to predict ahead of time um, which of those ideas, if we went back to the start of the 20th century, yeah, labor unions might have seemed like a good idea to some, but they were also involved in a whole bunch of riots and they're threatening strikes. That's a bit scary. Um, Knowing that that was in with benefit of hindsight, a good idea, and that several of the other economic rationalizations that were being proposed by the same politicians were terrible ideas, was very difficult to tell at the time. Um, and though people who were skeptical of many of the left's policies were correct, they were wrong in opposing the labour movement and opposing the increased formation of unions. And I often think that we need to exercise some degree of epistemic humility. This is my kind of core thesis of the evening. Um, we need to recognize that our own political beliefs, our own sort of system of ideology, wherever we stand, is probably flawed in some substantial ways. And if we get 50, 100 years down the line and look back on it, there are probably going to be major ways in which we're wrong. At least if we're looking back, with any kind of um, with any kind of level of dispassion. Um, and we should try to recognize that ahead of time so that we are willing to update our beliefs and to not get trapped into the cycle of assuming that we're always right and therefore rejecting the opinions of anyone else. Um, let's see, I'll just take it. What do you thought about EU creating EU army to avoid NATO? I think it's an interesting idea. I honestly don't know enough about the specifics. It's prima facie, I don't think the idea of some kind of like coordinated EU defense force is a bad idea. Uh, I certainly think like something along the lines of NATO, because of course NATO, it doesn't have like a shared army. NATO is just a bunch of separate armies with coordinating centres that enable them to work together. Something like that seems like a good idea potentially, but. Um, KJ says most socialists I met view socialism as workers owning the means of production. They generally don't want to give them to the state. Um, I mean, well, yeah, they view socialism as workers meaning the owners of production, but workers tend to, depending on again which variety of socialism you're talking about, workers tend to own the means of production through the state. The state is the interprets the workers' will, whether through elective democracy or through workers' councils or whatever, and then operates the means of production on behalf of the workers, with the workers still owning it, which seems to me to be a bit of that's my understanding at least of like most socialists I've talked to view, but I'm not an expert by any means. Um, uh, if politics is some form of morality, then we really don't have epistemology that could determine what is morally true or false. I don't think politics is just some form of morality. Politics is certainly based on moral principles, but politics is also, as they say, the art of the possible. Politics is what we think about what we should do and then how we should achieve it. So a socialist and I might both very much agree on the end goal of like some kind of post-scarcity economy where everybody gets to do whatever they want and doesn't have to work and all of that good stuff, healthcare at no cost, etc. But politics is partly how do we get there, and my policies prescriptions would be quite radically different from a lot of people I see online advocating for, fully automated luxury gay space communism, even though apart from the communism, that all sounds really good to me. Um, it's it's partly a practical matter, and as such, I think we can apply epistemology to um, certain aspects, at least, of our political beliefs. Um, though some people would argue you can apply epistemology to moral beliefs, I think, but um, anyway, that's getting off topic. Um, So yeah, part of this problem is like separating the uh, Federation anarcho-financialism. Um, I mean, yeah, like it would be nice to have. So a lot of people go for the Star Trek Federation as their idea of wondrous post-scarcity society, and I like the Federation, but for me it's the culture from the Ian M. Banks novels. And I mention this pretty much every time a post-scarcity economy comes up, but it's whereas like the Federation is kind of nice communism-ish. um, uh, I mean, my hot take for Star Wars is that it's per se propaganda, right? Because you've got the Federation who uh, uh, have gone through nuclear war in the history. Star Trek Next Generation covers that quite frequently. In the 21st century, there's a big nuclear war. But that led to finding aliens, the Vulcans, and being given a bunch of advanced technology and sharing and meeting the galactic community and becoming a post-scarcity sort of socialized state with a strong military. Like, that's Poseidism. Um, anyway, uh, so where was I? Thank you, leftists are cringe. um, so yeah, but the culture novels are like it's more anarchism, but sort of administered by superhuman artificial general intelligences who have interesting personalities and think in very different way to humans. So you know, it's basically uh, everything's run by AIs and everyone can do whatever they want. And if you, there aren't really any laws, but if you do anything bad enough, they just have a drone follow you around. And you know, if you like murder someone, they have a little drone follow you around. And if you try to murder someone again, they like put a force field around you, so you can't murder anyone. Which sounds like really good system of justice. All we need is technology that doesn't currently exist. Um, uh, what did you say? Politics? I was. Are you referring to what I was talking about just a moment ago? Because I was saying that politics is a combination of our moral beliefs and our practical decisions on how to enact those beliefs. Um, Politics is force fields. Mm. Um, so yeah, socialism. Well done on the labour movement. You know that was good. Shame about public sector unions. They, particularly police unions, not so good. Um, but teachers unions, but broadly, you know, unionisation seems to have done some good. So yay. Um, uh, Conservatism. Um, Mostly, conservatism is a bit shit. So sorry about that. But what? Well, sorry, last year's name. I mean, it depends on what kind of politics we're talking about. Politics is also the systems by which we interact with humans interact with each other on a large scale. Like politics describes several different phenomena. Um, so if we're talking about political beliefs, I think I think saying that political beliefs are the ways that we want to enact morality within society is something like that would be a reasonable description, maybe a reasonable definition. Um, yeah, uh, like politics is broadly speaking how we interact with each other. It's you know the because politics can exist in basically any organization where you have more than like one human. You get office politics and all kinds of like in friend group interpersonal politics. Um, but obviously also describes how we interact on national and international scales. Um, but yeah, what we're discussing here is kind of people's political philosophies and bits of them that aren't a shit. So conservatism, unfortunately, a lot of it is quite shit. Though you know, socialism also quite a lot of shitness there. Um, but one of the really core like critiques of conservatism or critiques used by conservatives that I think is uh, um, no last year's name that's a particular type of politics like or that's like you're describing politics as practiced, at least. Um, I'm talking more about because you last username you make um, political arguments. You have a politics, a political philosophy, but you wouldn't be in favour of skewering power on a large scale through mass emotional appeal, right? Um, we can reasonably say that you have politics, you have a set of political beliefs, um, but you're not all about that specifically. So I think we can reasonably talk. But anyway, I'm getting. You still have a political philosophy. Just because your political philosophy is don't enact violence on people, that's still a decision. That's still a prescription for political behaviour. Um, what do you think about capitalist externalities like global warming? Um, I I think broadly speaking, we do need some kind of government intervention to. It's certainly a market failure, and there's the old. Oh, sorry, last username. I don't mean to mischaracterize you. But yeah, not the robot. I think we certainly need some kind of government intervention to deal with um, massive externalities, negative externalities like global warming, which currently aren't priced into the cost of goods or the cost of services or whatnot. Um, uh, I I don't think that socialism currently, like the sort of current socialist thought, has particularly great solutions for that. Or well, again, it depends on what we're defining as socialist. Like, I think the lots of people on the left, lots of people who would describe themselves as DemSoc or SocDem, um, have perfectly good ideas. Investing in clean energy is definitely a good idea. Investing in regulations that improve the environmental impact of certain products, probably a good idea. I think that part of the problem with the current political debates, or the current response of sort of the socialist portion of the current political debate, is that they're very focused around, with regards to global warming, is they're very focused around a not penalising the consumer, so taxing the companies rather than carbon taxing, even though both get passed on to the consumer and one is less efficient and effective than the other. Um, and also around like essentially just enacting um, uh, all of their policies prescriptions that they've always wanted under the guise of the Green New Deal, for example, which it's convenient when the prescription to whatever new problem is arising is all of the stuff I've wanted to do for the last century and a half. Doesn't nobody buys it outside of the kind of Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn sort of wing. Like, we just need to get rid of capitalism in order to solve global warming, which that's not a useful contribution to the discussion. Anyway, socialism bad. We had a socialist president who's the worst ever, just taxing people. Yeah, it's always difficult using these words because they mean so many different things to so many people. Some people think socialism is just when like the government does anything, um, and some people think it's when the government does anything, and that's a good thing, and that's how we should use the term socialism. Some people think socialism exclusively means, the kind of regimes of the mid 20th century in Eastern Europe. Um, and certainly, if that's the definition we're using, I want nothing to do with it. Um, but for the purpose of this, I'm kind of using it in the sense of like moderately um, the sort of hardish left by Western standards, but not so much by um, Soviet standards. Political authority is kind of power. My philosophy is simply a rejection of that kind of power. Okay, well, I think we're just using the term political in different using different definitions of political here. Last username, which is fine. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm using politics to refer to, when I come to mentioning libertarianism, um, uh, I think that broadly libertarianism, for the purpose of this discussion, is a form of political belief or expression or whatnot. Um, so yeah, conservatism. Uh, if there are any conservatives watching, the thing you guys get right, to my mind, and that you deserve praise for, is constantly reminding everyone that we should understand structures, institutions, policies before tearing them down. And it's something that I would very much criticize myself for over the certainly between, like, I don't know, till my mid 20s or something. It's very easy to identify problems with society, with uh, the institutions that govern our lives, but it's very easy as well to tear them down without thinking about the benefits they offer us. And it's often the case that benefit the benefits are hidden, whereas the negatives are obvious. Um, and that's certainly not an argument generally against social change. There are lots of social changes that conservatives have opposed that they were absolutely wrong to do. Um, but I think it's also the case that it's it's something that, like, young people and uh, like firebrands, people with strong opinions, I include myself here, have often been very excited to do. Let's have a revolution, let's overthrow the status quo. But there are usually good reasons why, or at least there are usually strong reasons. I don't want to use good, I don't mean normatively here, but there are usually compelling reasons why um, a given social policy, a given institution is the way it is. Now, sometimes those reasons are bad ones and are normatively bad ones and reasons that we should reject. But things don't just happen completely accidentally, completely randomly, and it's I think a lot of people overestimate the degree to which um, society is robust and the ease with which society just kind of keeps on getting better, or at least keeps on basically staying the same. Um, but a functioning economy, a functioning like political discourse, generally uh, functioning humanity, is very heavily dependent on the constant work of a bunch of people who are engaged in boring jobs that none of us really understands. Um, in some government department or some minor corporation or some standards office, or all of these things that we never really think about and are very easy to kind of lump together as um, uh, the bureaucracy or um, the status quo. But nevertheless, when they go away, it causes a bunch of problems. So I guess conservatives takeaway from that I get from your philosophy that I like is just try to understand things more before trying to tear them down. And you'll sometimes find upon attempting to understand them that there's actually very good reason for it. Um, so specific example I would think of, NATO was mentioned a little while up. I used to be much more kind of pacifist, anti-militarist than I am now, because I just didn't really understand the purpose of organizations like NATO and of having a reasonably strong defense and the military industrial complex, all of these things. And I'm not at all saying that all of these things are uncritically good, but they do have a lot more function than I previously gave them credit for, and I'm much less eager to like blindly reduce military budgets than I used to be. Um, in large part because I think we shouldn't be too confident, shouldn't be too eager to get rid of systems that plausibly have contributed to the world not blowing up. Um, so that's not to say we shouldn't change things, but be just a little bit careful, a little bit careful. Um, what are your top three changes and introductions? Well, what do you mean? Kind of my top three policy changes generally, or uh, what's this? YouTube's. Um, oh, go on. Yeah, let's watch this because this is indeed relevant. Also,
NATO
it's
is under
The
fire
Economist and
from French
The
President
Economist.
Emmanuel Macron.
What we are currently experiencing is the brain death of NATO. You have no coordination whatsoever of strategic decision making between the United States and its NATO allies.
I can certainly
None.
believe that.
The president's comments come after the withdrawal of US troops from northeastern Syria. Fellow NATO member Turkey viewed the move as the green light for an incursion to push back Syrian Kurdish forces in the country, despite the risk that the chaos could give the Islamic State group an opening to mount a resurgence. Macron's comments were greeted with enthusiasm by the Russian Foreign Ministry.
Golden words, true and reflective, a clear definition of the current state of NATO.
But fellow NATO ally Germany was
That's not
quick to
great.
dismiss the president's assessment.
The French president has chosen drastic words. I don't share that point of view regarding cooperation within NATO. I think such sweeping criticism isn't necessary, even though we do have some problems and need to fix them.
Macron has also said he's no longer sure if the allies would come to each other's defence if attacked.
I mean,
And
that's
he
always been
accused the US
ambiguous.
of turning its back on Europe.
But
President Trump
yeah,
has repeatedly criticised members for not contributing
it's a tricky one because it's always been kind of shaky whether the US would actually get involved in a ground war in Europe to save, Berlin or wherever. But part of the reason why we didn't end up having a World War III in Europe, probably, plausibly at least, is the fact that the USSR always believed that there was enough of a chance that the US would come and intervene that it wasn't worth the risk. And like that's kind of the whole point of NATO to some degree is to provide that security shield to Western Europe. Yeah, as you say, Germany really does need the USA, and that's a situation that Trump seems to believe is a swindle on the US. They're providing security to Europe for free or something. But it's been in no small part responsible for the economic growth of Europe and hence with its close connection, the economic growth of the US, particularly, the like 50s and 60s. It's been wonderfully beneficial for both continents. It's been wonderfully beneficial for the world not to have global thermonuclear war. And yeah, it does concern me. I was saying this on Friday with the increased aggressiveness of Russia. I don't think that we're at all going to see troops marching on Berlin anytime soon. But the gradual erosion of NATO and of confidence between the NATO members just leaves unacceptable room open for this kind of salami slice, gobbling up of territory by Russia, and of generally bad behaviour by all of the kind of peripheral states around Europe. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an expert on these things.
Required
Just practically
2%
my
of their GDP
catchphrase
to
at this point.
NATO. But on Thursday,
But
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also
it's not
defended
good.
the organisation.
It is an absolute imperative that every country participate and
I
join.
don't care what Mike Pompeo had to say. Yeah. Do-do-do. Macron is interesting. His appearance in Lebanon streets after the explosion and presidencies. Yeah, Macron seems like a. He seems like a effective leader at least. Uh, like I say, I don't know that much about French politics, but yeah, regarding policies, indeed, I think I have down, if you read the description below, my top favoured policies. But yeah, all three of those, Neon Golden is quite correct, are major things that I would highlight. So broadly speaking, like research into existential risk and similar big-scale and systemic problems, drug legalization and criminal justice reform more broadly, foreign aid, particularly foreign health aid to the world's poorest countries, um, uh, generally like free trade and freedom of movement. These are things I'm very much in favour of. So yeah, those would be my kind of top policies, I think it's fair to say. Um, and yeah, the like, in fairness, I'm not too worried about the airspace thing. Like that's just something that kind of countries do to each other quite a lot, and it's something that like Russia has been doing for fucking ages. Um, it's like low-level provocations. They'll occasionally try to like sail a destroyer or something into UK waters or whatnot. Um, like it's not ideal, but the main thing that concerns me about those kind of instances isn't so much just the aggression. It's more the danger for miscalculation. Let's say uh, there's another poisoning in the UK. Novichok is implicated, and this time Boris Johnson, makes a big deal out of it, and saber rattles a little bit. Things escalate, and then one of these routine like boundary testing exercises where a ship or a plane goes up to the UK airspace or sea boundary, and someone fires a shot accidentally, it escalates, and then we're in a real problem. Not necessarily because anyone involved on the ground was being malicious or trying to be provocative or whatnot, but just because things got confused, communication is difficult, and things escalate. Um, yeah, apparently just poison everyone. The recent opposition leader I saw earlier seems to have been hit with a nerve agent, or at least seems to have been hit with a cholinesterase inhibitor, which is almost certainly going to be a nerve agent, and quite possibly Novichok, which is an evolution to VX and similar organophosphate nerve agents. So yeah, that's probably Russia. Um, Given that he's the Russian opposition, be surprised if he isn't. Anyway, right. So anarchism. Um, this is a new one recently. This opposition leader, because there was Litvinenko and Skripal. Skripal was the one in Salisbury last year before. And now there's, I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, I need to do some boring medical bullshit. So I'm just going to stick myself with some protein, specifically insulin, which is a very useful protein, which the function of which was discovered using research on dogs by Banting, Best and MacLeod in Canada, circa 1920, I think. Yeah, last year's day of political poisoning. We're gonna need to like make a calendar or something of people murdered via exotic chemical means, chemical or radiological. And it's a reminder, of course, that excuse me. Yeah, I think he's in a coma. This is all a reminder, of course, that the USSR had the world's most terrifying ever bioweapons and chemical weapons programs. They engineered some worrying items. They also released smallpox and I think typhoid once. There have been several quite major anthrax as well. There was a big anthrax breakout in, was that actually at Vector? It was at one of the major bioweapons labs in Russia that got completely hushed up. They blamed it on bad meat. And fortunately, some of the doctors involved in treating the patients ended up saving their records because they all knew it wasn't some bad sausages. But, you know, the KGB came round and said, it's some bad sausages, don't worry about it. And those notes ended up getting passed on to a researcher involved in the project who defected, which is the only reason the West found out about them. But of course, there was the Bioweapons Convention implemented in order to prevent stuff like this, which the US did comply with, but Russia decided that they wouldn't, or the Soviet Union decided they wouldn't, based on the assumption that the US would be cheating, which the US, as far as we can tell, wasn't. You know, they were generally keeping their end up, but nonetheless, the Soviets pressed ahead and developed. Well, they tried to develop such terrifying things as a bacterial agent with a virus in it. So, I shit you not. So you would get the bacterial infection, and that would clear up, and you know, that would go on for a little while and sicken you, but then it would clear up, and you'd think you were fine. And then you'd get the viral infection that would cause like massive neurological symptoms, and if not kill you, would disable you for life and all this kind of stuff. A lot of the details of the later portion of the program aren't as clear, so it's, my understanding is it's not certain whether they actually managed to make a particularly effective version of this. But they certainly spent a lot of resources attempting to engineer terrifying pathogens, which of course could have gone very bad. Well, it did go quite badly in some instances. There was a lake in the middle of the Aral Sea that, an island in the middle of the Aral Sea, which got very smallpoxy for a while. Excuse me. But, and they had all of the facilities to produce, like, excuse me, got some burps. Produce tons and tons of this stuff. And of course, had they designed it a bit poorly and one of these agents gotten out, it could have been pretty fucking bad. And they developed the Novichok, as I mentioned. And these, nuclear weapons are scary. Nuclear weapons are very concerning and are things that we need better controls on, blah, 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 no question. But there's something extra terrifying, I find, about not quite as much chemical weapons, but biological weapons in particular. Partly because they're much more insidious. They spread quietly and covertly. They don't go off with a big bang, making their presence obvious. They gradually infect you and then start causing major problems. Um, Also because they're more likely to spread out control and kill actually everyone, as opposed to only the people affected by the blasts and some people affected by nuclear winter or whatever. Um, but also because they're relatively democratizable and they're easy to, comparatively speaking, uh, easy for anyone to just cook up in their basement, whereas nuclear bomb, although they're not too complex, um, you need the fissile material, and the fissile material, i.e. uranium, plutonium, or I think you can use. No, sorry, I was thinking. So you can use uranium 235, but you can also use uranium 230. Something else. There's another isotope. Doesn't matter. Point is, um, bioweapons are fucking terrifying, and I'm not sure how I wandered off topic. But just something that worries me a lot. Um, yeah, I have heard about these trials. So there are some that have been looking at like doing gene drives, but they're a bit sketchy. Um, but yeah, modifying them so that they can't pass through the full, so that the malarial parasite can't pass through its full reproductive cycle inside them is a really cool idea. And while I would like to unironically genocide all of the Anopheles and Aegypti mosquito geni, I would settle for just genetically engineering them so they can't transmit diseases. And there'd probably be some some ecological consequences to getting rid of two genuses of genuses, geni, whatever, genopodes of mosquito, but they really suck. I mean, of course they do suck. That is how they transmit. Um, but they also suck in the like non-literal sense. Um, yeah. Uh, as I was saying before I started talking about biological warfare again, um, anarchism. So, uh, anarchism, I, idealistically, like eventually, I think anarchism is potentially quite attractive. Like I've spoken this a little bit about this a little bit with Daria Rahim, who, if you're not familiar, I'll do a shout out because I actually have this working. Uh, is that gonna? No, not gonna. There we go. Right. Yeah. Dario is a cool anarchist dude. In part because he recognizes that it's like not a plausible goal, tomorrow, and we should probably have working institutions between now and whenever we can achieve anarchism. But as a like pipe dream, I think it's quite attractive. I like the idea of not having anybody ruling over me, of not having anybody telling me what to do. All these things seem to be very attractive, and the idea of not using, you know, force to impose one's will on other people. This also all sounds very nice. In practice, I don't think that we can move towards anything like an anarchist society on any sort of large scale anytime soon. But nevertheless, uh, yeah, well, I don't know. I like to think everybody would ultimately want some kind of anarchist utopia, but Not everybody does. Some people want some very weird utopias. But one part of the kind of the anarchist position, or the frequent anarchist position, again, I don't want to claim that all anarchists believe exactly the same thing, but generally speaking, I think that we should be very suspicious of centralizing power and of unquestioned authority. And obviously, these aren't unique to anarchism, and I'll mention libertarianism in a moment, but particularly the focusing, centralizing of power in the hands of a few is something that we should be concerned about. And I think it's something that a lot of people um, uh, who advocate for capitalism, myself included, at least historically, haven't given enough consideration to the ways in which centralizing power in private organizations, corporations in particular, uh, can have some of the same sort of destructive effects as focusing that power in a government, say. I think that it is entirely reasonable to be concerned about the rise of corporations that do do take on some of the roles of government, um, and I think that more people who advocate for something vaguely like the status quo, not that I would say I'm advocating exactly the status quo, but I'm certainly advocating for kind of, social liberal, neoliberal continuation of, a market economy with decent, democratic institutions. Like, broad strokes, I'm arguing for the status quo. Um, but I think the people who do that, myself included, should spend more time thinking and more time being concerned about the way in which their policy prescriptions might lead to um, increased control, increased authority being wielded over them. And it kind of bleeds in with my libertarianism point, but it's very easy to say we should have a law. And this is a point I was trying to make on the Hippy Dippy show, the other recruitment show the other week. It's very easy to say, I want this thing in society changed, thus I should implement a law to make it so. Because every time you implement a law, that necessitates a bunch of ultimately a bunch of guys with guns, or at least guys with truncheons or mace or whatever, um, going around doing violence in your name in order to achieve the ends that you've set, and often achieving something somewhat different to what you set out to. And that doesn't mean we should never make laws. This is where I would disagree with my anarchist friends. I think there are still some areas that we need a state to deal with, but it's all too easy to sit here and go, yeah, we can just change society with a law, when the actual consequences of doing so um, can have very serious. The consequences for that can be very serious to people who we wouldn't immediately consider to be affected by it. Um, it's easy to say we should have increased controls on sugar and cigarettes and tobacco because those are bad and they have bad effects on people's health. But that law inevitably necessitates people doing violence in order to uh, ensure that it's followed. And in the case of oh god, I've forgotten his name, embarrassingly, but the guy who was not George Floyd, the guy who was um, killed by the cops for selling loose cigarettes. Uh, the fact that the police are willing to do some occasionally quite severe violence in order to uh, uh, stop people from selling cigarettes, is a reason that maybe we should be concerned about the broader effects of implementing. Yeah, the guy in New York. Um, well, my lollipops are gosh. Yeah, and I don't think we should be, threatening violence. Eric Garner, thank you. I don't think we should be doing violence to people for trivial achievements, and I think a lot of the time that is what people in authority do in order to engage in sort of short-term solutionism. And this is, as I say, I'm no longer a libertarianism. I'm no longer a libertarianism. I'm no longer a libertarian. But nevertheless, the libertarian critique of government, I think, is quite apt here. But where libertarianism sort of is distinct from anarchism, obviously one can overlap, but is that it argues that we should be particularly suspicious of government. And though I just was mentioning that corporations can be bad too, I think it's reasonable to seriously consider the fact that there are some functions that government can do that no corporation does, and no corporation can do unless we get into the most extreme of cyberpunk nightmares. A corporation has never implemented mass starvation. A corporation has never nuked anyone or threatened to nuke anyone. And that's not just because of lack of resources, although partly, but also because governments and corporations are set up to do different things. Corporations are there to make money, so while they might engage in some horribly callous behaviours to make money, they're rarely going to go out of their way, unless directed by government, to achieve bad social ends in and of themselves. For that, you do need a government, and thus we should still be quite suspicious of government, even though I'm like I say, a card-carrying liberal now. I would say that I'm a bit more reluctant to wield the regulatory hammer than most people who share my general views. Right, let's see. I'm going to respond to a few things in chat. It's just to be progressive in terms of diversity. We should put a few white-collar criminals on death row. I don't think we should have any death penalty, though I think it's I I think generally we should have less retributive punishment. I think we should have more rehabilitation and restitution. But I think we should tend to punish white-collar criminals in a similar fashion to other criminals. The fact that a white-collar criminal who's stolen a bunch of pension funds hasn't personally gone and punched a granny doesn't mean they haven't had substantial or haven't caused substantial harm. And even when the harms are very diffuse, that doesn't mean they're not real. So yeah, we should be harsher on white collar criminals, at least relative to non-white collar. Any chance for a shout out to the Polish Monarchist Party? Probably not. I don't know enough about the Polish Monarchist Party, but I'm not a monarchist myself, so sorry. What do you think of the licensed corps like Dutch East India Company? Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely. It's definitely like there you start to blur the boundaries. And in large part, those corporations were like able and encouraged to be as evil as they were because they had governments very much directly backing them. On the other hand, they do act as potential demonstrators of why we should be very skeptical of fully privatized armies and of complete deregulated capitalism, because maybe it'll end up in the same kind of state as the Dutch East India Company or the English East India Company. Let's see. Do you think we should pardon Snowden? Um, so I definitely think what Snowden did had good effects. Um, I think that he probably should be pardoned. Um, like, certainly, I think based on my understanding of the way in which he went about the leaking, I think there's greater cause to pardon him than Chelsea Manning, um, because he at least took it to like responsible journalists and tried to hold back potentially more like damaging but not in the public interest sort of information. Um, Also, like a lot of people criticize him for running off to Russia, but my understanding is he didn't have a lot of choice. Uh, Obviously, his like more recent Russian apologia is not so great, but like if I were in his situation, given that Putin seems to be the only one willing to give him a hotel room, I don't know what I'd do. Uh, but yeah, broadly speaking, though, I think that the leaks were um, very much a good thing because they shed light on a system of intelligence gathering that was just both operationally unjustified and a very, very serious tool for the government to be wielding, particularly without any meaningful popular oversight. Um, and yeah, last username pops on here every so often. I think it's fair to say that his views are wild, though I used to hold many of the same views. So yeah, um, I respect last username, even though we very much disagree on a few um, points. Uh, he really didn't have a choice; they would have killed him. Yeah, it's it's a difficult one. Like he probably, if not killed, like probably would have gotten chucked in some rather unpleasant jail, or just handed straight back to the US, um, which wouldn't be ideal for him. Like I think one can probably pardon him uh, without like undermining state security, and I do see a lot of national security people getting very pissed off about him. But again, as I was saying earlier, NATO is important. National security is more important than I used to give it credit for. All of these things are complex and valuable, but at the same time, when it comes to massive, unauthorized, bulk data collection on people, that's something that the public deserves to know about quite unambiguously, and I'm willing to tolerate uh, some fairly dodgy behaviour to uncover that. Though, of course, it is all a little bit suspicious that Trump's doing the pardoning because of the ties to Russia and all of I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, Julian Assange is a bit of a creepy dude. I met him once, obviously before all of the stuff kicked off, and he's just a little bit weird. Um, Only very briefly. I didn't like speak to him at length. Um, I feel our perspectives are not so different post-normal, except the hegemony I grew up in sees the state as and property-only class as alien foes. You're more inclined and socialised to take comfort in the state and protection of private interests. Yeah, uh, I mean, well, it depends on what we mean by state here. Uh, but yeah, where are you from, Mr. Flagrante Delecto? Out of interest, because yeah, if we have similar perspectives, that's cool. Please do, stick around. Thank you for the follow. Appreciate it. Um, Birmingham. Um, I haven't spent a lot of time there, I must say. When was the last time I was in Birmingham? Uh, One of my friends went to med school there. Hmm. Anyway, yeah, it's not that far. Like it's only what, 3/4 an hour on the train? Less. Um, but yeah. I remember most of what I remember of Birmingham is a very loud club that I was very drunk in for. I think my friend was celebrating finals or something. Um, yeah. Anyway. Um, so yeah, those were my things I had to say about why I'm a filthy radical centrist liberal something whatever I don't know, and why actually most political positions have something good to take from them, except for Nazis and tankies who can fuck right off. Um, uh, yes, I think it was Birmingham Uni. Yeah. Uh, oh, oh, right. I'm probably going to leave it there. I do apologise for the somewhat shortish stream. I am trying to increase my endurance, but I get very tired easily at the moment. But I hope you all enjoyed, and shout out to Corpus Coliseum, both the excellent username and for the Prime subscription. It's very much appreciated, and also a really cool username. Have they experimented on your arm? No, this is, well, it is kind of experimental. It's more like hacked. So I have the diabetes, type 1, and uh, this is a sensor made by Abbott Medical Technologies, which is just implanted in my arm. There's a little, here we go. I put it in last night so I can show you the applicator. It's held in here, and there's a sticky bit in here and the main chunker bit in here, and you press it together, and then chunk down on your arm, and it has a needle that injects in to guide in the glucose sensor, and then you use this little thing to scan over it, and it tells you that your glucose is going low, but it's probably not, because that's probably incorrect. Except I've got the little thing on top of it, which uses Bluetooth to transmit it to my phone, so I get a constant readout of my blood glucose updating every 5 minutes, which is very, very useful indeed. And though it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes, it's far, far better than doing like finger prick tests every hour or so. And it also makes me into a cyborg with an endocrine system that is hooked up to the internet, which is quite fun. Yeah, it's my recharge port. Yeah. um, yeah. Anyway, so thank you once again, everyone, for watching. I genuinely do appreciate people coming on and watching and listening to me ramble, and giving some good chat. It's really lovely. And yeah, thanks a lot. Have a good evening, afternoon, night, whatever it is in your time zone. And I will. Oh, my schedule for new people. I try to do 8 p.m. UK time, which is 3 p.m. US East Coast, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Sometimes it ends up being more like 9 or 10 p.m., but I post on Twitter. I'll do. There's my Twitter, and there's my Discord if you want to, get involved. My Discord is currently quite quiet, but the shout out to Chinchilla for setting that up, because it's like actually works quite nicely. But yeah, anyway, thank you, ta-ta.